So hello and thank you for joining us. I'm Brodart and Random House, a children's books division. We're really excited to have you here today and to be sharing and teaming up with the graphic novel webinar with the graphic novel folks. And as a reminder, all your questions should go into the Q&A and not into the chat. And we will answer what we can. And if we can't get to your questions, we will send you emails with answers. So I'm going to hand it over to Kat Kahn. She is our library expert on graphic novels, and Kat will introduce herself, and then she will also introduce the panelists. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us.
Hey everyone, I'm Catherine Kahn. Most people call me Kat. I'm a librarian, and I've been working with comics in libraries for, oh gosh, about 38 years. It's a long time. I started as a comics reader when I was about 5 years old and encouraged by my father. So I'm actually like a second generation comics fan. He started reading them in the 30s. And I never did stop reading them all the way through high school and college, and been able to incorporate it into my library work. And so over the years, I've really seen the changes in the comics industry in terms of getting into libraries and adding not just superheroes, but going into all kinds of genres and getting all kinds of different creators and readers involved, way beyond the big two publishers. And I'm just thrilled to see all of that, and to see over the, I think about the last couple of decades, we've seen more book trade publishers starting new imprints, focusing on, comics, graphic novels that would be published as books and, be put into libraries. First Second was one of the early ones, and that's how I got to know Gina. And now with Random House graphics, we're really expanding even further and getting into all age groups, all kinds of titles, all kinds of creators. And I am absolutely happy to see all of this. And because of that, I think these creators that we're going to talk to today do present new viewpoints, different viewpoints, and their books really touch the heart in so many different ways, beyond just the fantasy or the historical fiction that they're writing. And I'm excited to introduce all of them to all of our people watching today. And yeah, my bio is a little bit out of date. I'm no longer a children's school librarian. I work in my local public library, and I select adult graphic novels now. Okay. So first of all, we have Trung Nguyen, and he is a comics artist. He was born in the Philippines, moved to the United States while he was very young with his family. I like the fact that he was drawing comics in middle school, like a lot of kids that I have worked with have done. Gave it up in college, got into art school, got his BA in studio art from Hamline University, and was going to go into arts administration, but pivoted, good for us, into creating comics. He's illustrated books for Oni Comics' Limerence Press imprint and for Image Comics. And The Magic Fish is his debut graphic novel from Random House Graphic. It has already received lots of positive reviews, has appeared on a number of best lists of 2020 lists, and I'm really excited to let him present The Magic Fish to us all.
Hello, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I'm so excited to be talking to everyone about The Magic Fish, and I'm so happy that I had the opportunity to tell this story with Random House Graphic, just some of the best people to work with in graphic novels. The Magic Fish is a story about a young boy who's a first-generation immigrant who is looking for ways to connect with his family and to eventually come out to his parents, but he's in middle school in the 90s, and he's trying to traverse some language barriers that he is running into in terms of how to describe his experiences And so he goes to the library and he picks up a lot of books and he reads them with his parents in an effort to sort of to give them an idea of where he's coming from and where his headspace is currently in his life. Are we starting with the slides?
Uh-oh, Anita, slides, there.
Okay, we can actually go on to the next slide, please. So the story kind of takes place within a couple of different story universes, and we've color coded each of the timelines in the story. And so the magic fish takes place in the present in this sort of kind of warm pinkish hue. It occasionally gives us context for Tien's mother's story as well with kind of warm yellow hues. And as he reads stories with his family, it takes on a lot of kind of cool blue hues. And so we get kind of a nice morning color, and then we get a midday color, and then we get a nighttime color to kind of indicate a bedtime story vibe when we're telling the fairy tales. Each of the fairy tales are, it's sort of a comparison between two Cinderella stories and then also kind of a short history of the Little Mermaid as well. It delves into the different ways that stories and fairy tales in particular change over time, and they sort of change shape depending on where they find themselves in the world. They sort of change shape and they change their clothes, but oftentimes a lot of the content is the same. And so the fascinating thing for me about exploring fairy tales through comic books is the fact that they tell you a little bit more about the storyteller than the content really has anything to say. And those connections that we kind of form between the reader and the storyteller are the things that really kind of make that magic happen in terms of storytelling and in terms of connecting with the people in our lives. And so that space where fairy tales meet the heartbeat of like your day-to-day existence is the space that I wanted to explore with the magic fish. It's a lot about searching for ways to communicate and trying to bridge language barriers and to bridge those gaps between generations. And where understanding or vernacular is a little bit lacking, sometimes images or metaphors or stories can really be a wonderful way to traverse those different things. We can go on to the next slide, please. And so as the magic fish unfolds, a lot of the stories kind of will take place in fantastical fairy tale spaces, often told through the perspectives of whoever is telling the story. And so in the first story, Tien tells the story, and so he has a conception of kind of Eurocentric fairy tales that's really evident in the iconography that's brought up. And the second story, as an example page here, was told through the eyes of a relative of Tien's, his great aunt. And so you kind of see the world through her perspective, and the way that she builds fairy tales is rooted in her experiences as a woman who grew up in Vietnam in the 1940s and 50s. And so the rest of the book kind of follows those visual rules. You follow the visual imagination of each of the people who are telling the stories so that you can get a more rich and lively look at their inner lives as well as the stories that they're trying to convey. Next slide, please. One of the questions that we were asked as creators to do is to kind of pull up a graphic novel that really inspires us. And this is a recent one by Linnea Sterti from Piao Studios called Stages of Rot. It's a science fiction book that I really loved and enjoyed because it's very challenging to read as a text if you're not terribly concerned with kind of engaging with your visual imagination. It takes place in a universe that you kind of really have to suspend your disbelief to engage with and imagine fully. And I really like the ways that it really artfully takes you to spaces that you couldn't very well describe in words all of the time. And the text is very spare, and there is text in the book, but I do admire the ways that it tells a very specific and very certain science fiction story with mostly the use of images. It's very dense for being a book that's mostly images. So that's something that I really enjoyed. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to my presentation about the magic fish and this book that I really admire. And I am very excited to hear a little bit more about Turtle in Paradise.
Yeah, okay. Trung, you brought up something about language barriers. I think there are a number of people, I'm one of them. My mother is Japanese, and English is definitely her second language. She didn't really learn until she met my dad. It's like 6 months before they got married. So that language difference was always there in my household too. And I really love how your book uses that with the images. And I just wish I could have grown up that way. But um, I also really like the fact that you took these fairy tales, and some people have a particular vision of these stories based on the Disney movies, especially, which are so popular. Um, and I just wondered, did you, especially for like the Little Mermaid, did you deliberately step away from that Disney type version of the tale in your retelling?
Yes, absolutely. I had to take stock of sort of what the popular imagination would present fairy tales as and sort of critique it a little bit. And I do enjoy the Disney movies, and I love their kind of space in history as kind of this kind of where the popular imagination hinges on princess stories. And so the very first fairy tale within the universe of the Magic Fish is told from the imagination of the young boy, and so he kind of sees things in terms of like very Disneyfied princess dresses. And so there's a bit of research that I had to do to figure out why we imagine princess dresses this way and why Disney defaulted to this particular silhouette and the ways that dresses looked. And it has a lot to do with the Second World War and the ways that fabric was distributed afterwards. And so the couture houses could once again, after the World Wars, create really elaborate fabric heavy dresses. And so, and the princess stories that Disney is most famous for, aside from Snow White, the ones that kind of saved the studio were Cinderella and then Sleeping Beauty. And those were mid-century creations right after the World Wars. And so they have a lot of like Givenchy dress aesthetics about them as well. And so the reaction to that in the Little Mermaid story was kind of more about exploring the visual imagination of someone who wasn't aware of those tropes as she's telling the story. And so her visual imagination comes from like Hong Kong movies instead. And so you kind of get this sort of story space where the popular imagination can exist with a different notion of it from somewhere else in the world.
Thank you. That's cool. I read in another interview that you had done that you found out something about Hans Christian Andersen that for Little Mermaid that I hadn't heard before. And I was fascinated by that letter that you were quoting, that letter that he had written, and that you think of Little Mermaid as sort of this way of conveying that particular relationship that he had.
Yeah, I had always considered The Little Mermaid to be an immigrant story. And so that was kind of my conception of it growing up. And so that was sort of the reason why I was really fascinated with that story in particular. And then I realized that just like all of the other fairy tales, and Anderson is really interesting because he sort of writes literary fairy tales. He was a contemporary author in the middle of the 1800s. And so he wrote primarily for children. He had an intentional audience and he had editors. And it's quite unlike a lot of the oral tradition fairy tales that we think about. And we sort of group him up with the Brothers Grimm just because they're popular and everyone knows them. But he was writing for a contemporary audience. And so there's a little bit more personality in his work. And so diving into that a little bit further and sort of reading his letters about the ways that he formed relationships, the ways that he conveyed his feelings to his friends and to people that he loved or that he was in love with, was really very eye-opening. And it's one of those situations where like I'm careful about, you know, applying contemporary labels to people who might be expressing something that they couldn't quite have the vocabulary to express in the past. There's no posthumously doing that, but the ways that he expressed his love for a particular friend of his by the name of Edvard Collins, I think. He was an accountant and he was a very serious man. And the ways that this author, that Hans Christian Andersen, tried to convey his very deep and intense feelings of kind of passion and romantic love for this man were a really kind of compelling jumping off point for The Little Mermaid and the way to read that text. And The Little Mermaid was also published shortly after this exchange as well. And so making those connections might not be such a stretch, but I think for the sake of, you know, fiction and for the sake of exploring fairy tales and stories about transition, making that connection between The Little Mermaid as an immigrant story, as a fish out of water, and also kind of understanding it as a queer love story was really integral to the way that I wanted to tell The Magic Fish.
And that's just when I pointed it out to a friend of mine, colleague at work, and showing her the book, it was like, wow, that really helps us understand a lot more about the story. So thank you for that. Okay, now we have Jennifer Holm, and Jenny is a best-selling author. She's a 3-time Newbery Honor winner for her books for children and for those of us grown-ups who love reading children's books. She also won the 2017 Scott Odell Award for Historical Fiction for Full of Beans. And she's collaborated with her brother Matthew Holm on 2 different graphic novel series for children, Baby Mouse, which won the 2013 Eisner Award for Best Publication for Early Readers, and Squish, which is now showing on HBO Max as an animated series. Yay! And Turtle in Paradise was one of those Newbery Honor winning books. And she teamed up with Savannah Ganesho, whom we will be talking with later, to adapt her novel into a graphic novel.
All right, so I thought I'd tell you a little bit about where the story for Turtle came from. If we can go to the first slide, please. So when most people think of Key West, they think of Jimmy Buffett and Margaritaville. But when I think of Key West, I think of it as this picture here. This is a picture of Key West from the 1930s, taken by one of my family members. And the reason I know about Key West during this time is because that's where my family came from. If you can go to the next slide. My great-grandmother's name was Jenny Lewin. I'm named after her. She was Bahamian. So she, along with quite a large exodus of Bahamians from the Bahamas, went to Key West in the late 1800s and settled there. And they called them Key West conchs. If you can go to the next slide. You probably know what a conch shell is. They called them Key West conchs, these Bahamians that settled in Key West, because when they lived in the Bahamas, they were mostly conch fishermen. So when you pick up these wonderful conchs, there's a little bit of chewy meat in it. All right, we can go to the next slide. I heard a lot about Key West when I was growing up. See, my mother, Penny, she actually grew up in New Jersey. And every summer she would go with her grandmother, my great-grandmother, to spend the summer in Key West. And as you can see, my mother didn't seem to enjoy Key West very much at all. In fact, she hated it. This is such a classic picture of her looking very bitter in Key West. She was kind of a city girl. You know, she grew up in Highland Park, New Jersey, just outside of New York City. And she was, you know, she thought she was like more of a sophisticated kid. And then she would go down to Key West and everything was different. Next slide, please. Key West wasn't like New Jersey. The streets then were just little dirt lanes, falling down fences. Everything was overgrown, palm trees. Next slide, please. And it was hot, it was sticky, there were mosquitoes everywhere, there was no air conditioning. She just thought it was like a weird, strange place. She wasn't very fond of it, actually. Even the food was different in Key West. For breakfast, her family would always feed her avocado on Cuban bread. In case you guys are wondering where the famous avocado toast came from, it actually was a Key West specialty. I know, it's so funny. It's trendy now, but she didn't like that. She wanted to just have pancakes. And there were just a lot of things about Key West that kind of drove her nuts about how superstitious everybody was. One of the superstitions her mother told her when she would spend the summer in Key West was that every night she should shake out her shoes. Next slide. Classic Mary Jane's. And my mom did do that until one day she shook out her shoes and, next slide, a scorpion popped out, because scorpions like to live in nice little small places like shoes and mailboxes. So I heard all these stories growing up and I wanted to write about Key West. And so Turtle in Paradise really is kind of a version, in a weird way, of my mother's adventures in Key West. It's a fictionalized version, of course. It's about a girl named Turtle who, during the Great Depression, her mother gets a job as a live-in housekeeper. And so she isn't allowed to stay with mom. So mom ships her down to Key West to live with her aunt and a bunch of cousins that she's never met before. And she finds Key West strange the way my mother did. You know, everybody runs around barefoot. It's hot and sticky. There are scorpions. It's strange. And it's really about a girl's adventure with coming to learn about a different side of her family. And I was very excited. I'd been pushing to make this into a graphic novel for a while, mostly because of my readers. I was one of my most requested things whenever I would do a school visit. Would I ever do a graphic novel of Turtle? And so I was absolutely thrilled when Savannah teamed up with me to do it.
All right. Thank you. And the novel is wonderful. The graphic novel is equally wonderful in its own way with all the visual aspects of it. So we can see that you did tie in a lot of your family's history into Turtle, right? With everything. Now, being set during the Great Depression, you do make reference to it quite a bit, and Savannah's art does show it a lot, that people were struggling quite a bit. And so there are some darker aspects, you know, with the fact that her mother has to work and send her away because she can't live with her. She goes to live with her cousins, and their father has to work far away from them because that's the only job that he could find. I've noticed that you do put in a lot of these somewhat darker aspects in your story, but in such a way that kids can kind of handle it and get maybe a little better grasp on what life was like during those times.
Yep. I mean, I think one of the reasons kids are always going through hard things. We just forget it. You know, mom and dad might be getting, somebody's dying, moving around. In real life during the Depression, one of my grandmother's brothers lost his job in Key West, so he actually moved his whole family up to New Jersey. I mean, so that's just a common thing that happens during a hard time.
And something else that I really got struck by when I was reading it, when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, babysitting and taking care of babies was a girl's job.
Yes.
And I love how you've got Beans and his crew taking care of babies and creating their special little formula to help out. How did you decide to do that?
Yeah, so there's a whole thread in the book that all of Turtle's cousins they call themselves the Diaper Gang, and they run a babysitting club where they, you know, take in colicky babies so mom can have an hour to do the laundry or do some chores or take in washing or something. And it's just something that I've thought of for years. I come from a very big family. I'm one of 5. I'm the only girl. I'm the middle child. And I think in previous generations, all the kids would babysit, not necessarily the girls. And the babysitter, the Diaper Gang was kind of ripped from real life for me. So when I was a young mom, I was living in a suburban neighborhood, and I had a 2-year-old, and all the other kids on the block were in like 8 and 9, 7, 8, 9, 10, so a bit older than my toddler son. And during one summer, they would show up at my door. And the first time they came, I was thrilled because this whole pack of them, boys included, boys and girls, just showed up, and they wanted to know, their mothers knew that I was trying to, you know, write and take care of Will. If they wanted to know if I would like some babysitting help. And I said, sure, that would be great. If you could keep him in the basement and occupy him for an hour, I'd be so happy. And so they did, and I was so thrilled that I made them a fancy lunch after that. You know, like I made them pizza and ice cream sundaes. And then they showed up the next day to babysit. And I thought, great. And they watched Will, I got some work done. I made them, you know, good quesadilla lunch. And then on like the 3rd or 4th day when they came over to babysit, they started giving me orders of like what they wanted for lunch, because they were pretty much coming over because they were getting like this great lunch at my house that their own mom would have just said like, go make a PB&J. They'd watch Will for an hour and I would like buy them whatever they wanted to eat. So it was just so funny. So I just pretty much ripped that one from real life.
Oh, that is so cool. So yeah, that was pretty much those were the main things that I took away from that, besides just the wonderful story. My father grew, like I said, my father grew up during the Depression too. So I've heard some of his stories, but I just love seeing that. And I hope that the kids who are reading this will get a better understanding of what things were like
Me too.
for people back then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Savannah. Savannah is an artist. She's from New Orleans, earned her Bachelor's of Fine Arts in Film from the University of New Orleans. She's done a really fun webcomic, George and Johnny, about unlikely friends, school, bands, food, all kinds of fun. I really enjoyed looking at that. She has done art for several comic series, including Jen and the Holograms, Adventure Time Comics, and Lumberjanes. She worked with Kevin Panetta on the graphic novel Bloom, and of course, most recently has collaborated with Jenny Holm in adapting Turtle in Paradise into a graphic novel. So take it away, Savannah.
Thanks so much for the intro. Oh man, those presentations were so amazing. I'm still a hard act to follow. But yeah, I'm Savannah. I'm from New Orleans. Like Kat said, this is Turtle in Paradise is my second graphic novel. My first graphic novel was Bloom with Kevin, and I also do a webcomic called George and Johnny. I really love slice of life and romance and just character-driven stories. It's one of my favorite things. And when I got approached to do Turtle in Paradise, the characters really stood out to me, and that was one of the things that really made me excited. Next slide, please. Besides the characters, I also, when I was in middle school, historical fiction was my favorite genre. It's like all that I read. And when I read Turtle in Paradise, it really took me back, and to have the opportunity to bring a visual life to a novel like this, I just thought was such an awesome opportunity to bring something beautiful to kids like me when I was younger and loving historical fiction. But I just wanted to make something that would like really partner well with what a kid's imagination of this book. And when I was a kid, I was just ingesting animation constantly. So I really wanted Turtle in Paradise to have sort of a animation vibe. And I spoke with the colorist Lark Pian, who did the colors on the book, about that. And we were able to come up with a very vibrant and lush sort of style for the book. It was also really important to me to make the book as historically accurate as I possibly could. We had a bit of a quick turnaround, but with Jenny's help, I was able to learn just so much information about Key West in a really small amount of time. But I had a really great time doing all of that research and designing all the characters and learning a lot about Key West, which I still have not been there, and I cannot wait to go once I can. I also really just love how different this book feels. It felt really impactful to me. When I read it, I knew that if I was a kid and I was reading this book, that it definitely would have been one of the ones that I would remember for a really long time. Without spoiling anything, just I think that the direction that it goes is just, it's really different from what you would expect to read as a kid, I thought. And I just really loved that, and you know, wanted to work on it absolutely. Okay, next slide. And then we were asked to show some of our influences, and I'm really inspired by cinema mostly. Like Kat said, that I got my BFA in film, so I'm really attracted to graphic novels that are very cinematic, and here's some examples. For example, This One Summer, which is like, I cannot praise the book enough. It's like the best book. my number one inspiration. My copy is like all warped and bookmarked, and like I still to this day will like, when I'm working on comics especially, will like pick it up and be like, do they do that in this one summer? Or like, I can get away with this because they do it in this book. And I just always use it as an example. Also, the book, the manga Wandering Sun by Takako Shimura, I really love. I just really love how atmospheric and quiet this book is. And I love the high contrast and simple drawings. It's just really inspiring to me. And I love how they do their panels, the layouts and stuff are wonderful. And then also Tropic of the Sea by Satoshi Kon, like visually is really inspirational to me. I love like the cinematic feel of it, and all of the drawings are masterful, of course, like he is like a master. But and then finally also I'm really inspired by Mirror by Emma Rios and Hui Lim. I just also think that using like creative paneling like this really just shows how innovative and new of a medium comics is. And it's just really inspiring to like see like there's so much stuff that we can do with comics that like makes it so much more artistic and creative. And yeah, it really inspires me.
All right, thank you. So you talked about the research that you did for Turtle in Paradise. What did you go like online, look at books? What did you do?
Yeah, Jenny was a great resource. I mean, she had already done so much research for the novel, so she kind of, you know, gave me all of her references, and then on my own, I just sort of tried to really familiarize my sense of the area at the time, because although it is very similar today, it is super different. And I even went as far as to like look up old Sanborn maps of Key West and to try to like figure out where everything was, because Sanborn maps are like old insurance for fire maps, if you didn't know that. They had them for like every year, like up until I think the 50s or something. I think they're even longer than that. But yeah, so I looked at Sanborn maps, and I really wanted to know exactly like where Turtle was going and like how you would get there. And like, even though it doesn't show up in the book, I think that it really informed some of my decisions. And I didn't want the book to exist scene by scene in like a void. Like I wanted everything to feel connected. So I tried to really learn where things were and like how they would look specifically. I really hope that it was successful, because I tried my best with no frame of reference, but I think that we did a pretty good job. And you know, me and Lark too, working from mostly black and white photographs, some of the most useful references were actually old postcards, because they were basically like illustrations of photographs, but the illustrator would go in and color over them. So you kind of had sort of like a guessing as to what things would look like. And it also kind of helped to inform how vibrant we wanted the book, because all of our references were in black and white, but we wanted it to feel like lush and green like Key West was. So while maintaining like a more historical feel. And then like clothing research, I did a fair bit of clothing research too, to mainly focus on like what normal people were, like everyday people were wearing, not normal people, and not so much what they were selling in catalogs, because it doesn't necessarily reflect. And then some of the like older people wear like more older styles, and you know, not everything's new, so I wanted that to sort of play a part in it too.
Yeah, it really came through very well. I live in Florida, not in Key West. I live in Northwest Florida, but we have similar vegetation. And for me, looking at the graphic novel, a lot of that really does come home. That sense of overgrowth. You very, very well.
Yeah, and that actually too, I grew up for a time before Katrina lived in Waveland, Mississippi, on the beach, like 3 houses down. And that was another reason why I really was very excited to the book, because I was a kid on the beach looking at turtles, looking at all kinds of stuff. And it just, really brought me back. And I thought that I could bring a lot to like that atmosphere of living like on a coastal town. And yeah, it was super inspiring.
And I love your artwork. The faces are very simple, but so expressive.
Oh, thank you so much.
Because you can kind of almost see what's going on in the minds. And I just love Bean's expression all the time. He's really a kid. It really,
a little rascal. Yeah. The kids were so fun to design and play with. They're just so expressive, and like they're just great to like use the character acting on, like you said, like to make something a little bit more going on in their head with their dialogue, because the dialogue is so funny and quick. And so I wanted the expressions to equally read that way as well. I'm so glad that came through for you.
Oh yeah, it definitely did. And so thank you again so much. The art that you did put together with Lark's coloring just made it feel so lush and tropical, the way that Key West was and is.
Oh,
and
thank you so much.
Yeah, coming, like I said, having lived here in Florida for quite a while now, being able to see that come through and look pretty realistic is wonderful. So thank you. Thank you both. Yes, Jenny. Okay. And now we have Gina Gagliano. Gina has, like I said, I've known her for quite some time now. She is currently the publishing director of Random House Graphic. She started her publishing career as a marketing associate for First Second Books, and she worked in marketing and publicity there until she moved to Random House Children's Books. And throughout her career, she has helped publish, I think, excellent graphic novels for all age levels. She's also worked on comics programming and media committees for the Brooklyn Book Festival. She co-hosts a graphic novel publishing podcast called Graphic Novel TK with Allison Wilgus. And I think she's one of the best people out there helping people get graphic novels. So take it away, Gina.
Thanks, Kat. That's such a wonderful introduction. And it's fantastic to be here with Trung and with Jenny and Savannah and with all of you amazing librarians who, we're all working together to get comics out there for more kids and teenagers, which is just fantastic. So Random House Graphic is a new kids and YA graphic novel imprint and brand. It's part of Random House Children's Books, and we just kicked it off last year. So we are all coming in now on year 2 of Random House Graphic publishing. If we can go to the next slide. The Random House Graphic motto is a graphic novel on every bookshelf. And what that means is all ages of kids, ages 4 to college, kids as soon as they can read comics, all genres, science fiction, fantasy, mystery, contemporary, fiction, and nonfiction. And it means diverse authors and experiences, because you get graphic novels on every bookshelf by working with every author, to make stories for every kid. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see we have a number of books. At Random House Graphic, we publish thoughtful stories with great writing, amazing art, and just really value the quality in all of the books that we're doing. So you can see on this slide the selection of books from us in 2020, which range on the younger end from books for that 4 to 8-year-old category, like Pizza and Taco and Don't Feed the Squirrels, to stories for middle grade, like Lucy Knisley's Stepping Stones or Chad Sell's Doodleville, to books on the YA of things like The Magic Fish by Trung, which you've all heard about. And then on the next slide, you can also see things coming from Random House Graphic in 2021, this year, including Turtle in Paradise by Jenny and Savannah. Then also younger books, things like Scaredy Squirrel by Melanie Watts, Monster Friends by Katie Van Dorn. Lots of great middle grade adventures like Katie the Cat Sitter from Colleen Venable and Stephanie Yu. And then YA graphic novels as well, from things like Sex Education and Let's Talk About It by Erica Moen and Matt Nolan, to fantasy horror like Fly by Night by Tara O'Connor. So we are 2 years into our mission of a graphic novel on every bookshelf, and with every book we publish, with every season, we are getting books out to more and more readers, with the help of our fantastic authors and also with the essential support of all librarians like you. The last slide of this presentation is just some information about how you can keep in touch with us. We are on Twitter and Instagram at RH Kids Graphic, and we also have an e-newsletter in case you're listening to this presentation and you're like, please send me information about all these graphic novels all the time. That's a great place to get that in your inbox every month.
Okay, thank you. Gina, I noticed you've got such a nice mix of established authors and creators, with Jenny, with people like John Gallagher, with Judd Winnick, and some of the others. And then you've got a whole slew of newer creators, new talent, people like Trung and Savannah, and a lot of others that I've seen. How do you find all those wonderful creators and connect with them?
Thanks, Kat. It's very kind of you to be so excited about all of our authors and to ask this question. And I think today, 2020, 2021, right now, we're in a new age of graphic novels. Right now we have more authors coming to graphic novels than ever before, inspired by the success of kids comics over the past decade and a half. And that's so great, because more authors means more voices, and that means more opportunities for readers, more stories that readers can connect with. And we really prioritize that at Random House Graphic, bringing new voices and new stories into our bookshelf of what we publish. So to do that, we go to comics conventions and meet people there. We talk at high schools and also colleges to people who are interested in working in comics. The other thing we do is pay attention to the internet, which, as we are having the past 12 months that we have, is just the place where so many people are, and make sure we're connecting with people there. So a goal for us here at Random House Graphic is expanding the market, really getting graphic novels to be part of what everyone is reading.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you've got a lot of diverse people coming in, different from all kinds of different viewpoints, whether that's ethnicities or anything else, different kinds of backgrounds, and producing stories that anyone can connect with. And do you invite any people to submit portfolios or anything like that?
Definitely. So, we have an email address on our website, which is rhkidsgraphic.com. And, anyone who is interested in submitting graphic novels can go through there. But it is definitely a priority for my team. Whitney Leopard, who's our senior editor, Patrick Crotty, who's our senior designer, and Nicole Valdez, who does our marketing and publicity, to really be featuring BIPOC and queer voices in the books that we publish, because historically the publishing industry has been very white, very straight. And you know, it hasn't had enough diversity. It hasn't represented the population of the US. It hasn't given all kids a gateway into reading. So at Random House Graphic, we think about that, and we want to be pushing that in a different direction.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
So we do have one question, and I think might be good for the panelists to all answer. I know Jenny answered it. A librarian from Prince George Public Library is always getting questions from parents about getting their kids to read real books rather than comics or graphic novels. And she's looking for a very short, concise answer that she can give parents on, you know, reading is reading. So since you guys are the experts, I thought you might have some good comments.
Well, I piped in. I think the one thing that helps telling parents, and I myself am a parent of kids in school, and so there is hesitation, but I think it's, you know, becoming a lifelong reader, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. You want to keep kids engaged throughout their lifetime. And so I think where graphic novels are really special is that it really helps kids to like exercise their reading muscle. Like a child the most common thing we hear is like, say, if I'm at a bookstore and I'm signing books, by the time a kid gets up to me in line, they'll proudly tell me, I read the entire book, you know, already. And so they feel very confident. They might struggle with a 200-page textbook or a 150-page all textbook, but they will whip through a 100-page Baby Mouse book, and then they'll reread that book again and again. So they'll feel confident, and it'll boost their excitement to continue to read. So you want to keep them loving reading more than anything, I think.
I think that question is always a little bit difficult to get when you're in a position where you can share books with parents and with children. And I think the tack that I've usually taken is that when parents ask about reading real books, it usually indicates to me that they're looking for something that will bolster their children's chances at being successful at like standardized tests and things like that. And graphic novels don't really have a space in that specific arena. And so when parents have that mindset, it's difficult to convince them that there's value in graphic novels. You can't really tell them that like, oh, like visual literacy is really important, because being an adult and navigating a world where things are consumed visually and people will convey messages visually, it's easier to spot a lie if you've engaged your visual vernacular a little bit more. It's easier to spot doctored photos. It sparks a sense of curiosity, graphic novels do, in where an image comes from. And so being able to identify an image and have the tools to like look for that image in other places and to detect patterns is something that is really valuable as a reader in terms of historicity. If you're watching television, if you're watching movies, if you're doing any of these things, being a mindful consumer of all of this media means developing a sense of visual literacy. And so that's what I would say if someone were to be like, what is the value in graphic novels? But I think in a situation where a parent is convinced that graphic novels are bad, I think in those cases, I would just have a little bit more confidence in children's agency in following their own interests, because they will find what they want, regardless of what their parents say. And I think, especially if you're working at a library, just making those materials available to them, like children will find them, maybe outside of the scope of their parents.
I feel like those two answers are the scope of the answer, you know, from the theoretical educational visual literacy to giving kids books that they love. Like that's why graphic novels.
Yeah. And for me personally, I told you, I've been reading comics since I was 5 years old. I've been reading them for 6 decades, a long time. And when I was a school librarian, I had a lot of complaints from parents, and I would tell them, look, I was a National Merit Scholar, and I was reading comics the whole time. So comics won't stunt the brain. They won't prevent your kid from getting good grades in school. And in fact, might enhance them, which is why I have my little slogan, which is exercise your whole brain, read comics, because the visual and the words work together, and your brain has to work both sides, right and left, in order to interpret comics. So I try to encourage people, like say, look, you know, an honor student reading comics the whole time. And hopefully that helped convince some people. But I also try to point them out to, even like Common Sense Media has published web articles promoting comics reading as good reading for their kids. So there are sources out there that we could point them, the librarians and teachers can point them to as well.
Yeah, and we also have some great comments to this in the Q&A. One from an anonymous attendee who says it's about developing a love of literature in whatever form relates best to the kid. And another person who is bringing up the idea of comics as something that can be used as a transitional form between, you know, being read to in a picture book state and reading independently. Okay. Are there any more questions from attendees? Or Kat, do you have any more questions yourself?
I was just wondering, I've seen just that there seem to be a few more questions that might have popped up in the Q&A. I don't know.
Their responses to the question.
Ah, okay. Well, the question did bring up for me, you know, for everything that y'all are doing is tying in history, tying in fantasy and fairy tales into real life, with all the different relationships and everything that's been happening, that some people might think that fairy tales are escapism, but Trung has made it clear in Magic Fish that there are definite tie-ins to how you respond to things in life. And I just wonder if you want to expand a little bit more on that, Trung?
Sure. Yeah, I think like one of the things that I brought up is that fairy tales tell you more about the teller than the content of the story has much to say, and I think that can be really true of a lot of different media that we consume nowadays. Like, we're in this space where there's a lot of rebooting and a lot of remaking of older properties, and while on a very practical level, those are about extending a copyright. Like, it's not about like the literary merit of any of these stories in particular. But one of the kind of side effects of that is we do get to see new generations kind of either consuming or taking part in the creation of a new take on an old thing. And so that oftentimes gives you a better sense of where we are as a culture and where our priorities have shifted. And this is true of stories that pop up in similar places, you know, in terms of where it shows up in the world and not just where it shows up in time. And so I always think that that's kind of a really fascinating way to think about stories as they're told and retold and iterated upon in future editions, or when you get new storytellers kind of latching on to older things. It's always fun to see how priorities have changed. And I think one of the things that graphic novels does really well in particular with that is that it engages with, you know, your sense of visual style and the ways that an image that a graphic novelist or an author kind of like the way that they construct images as a part of their handwriting. And so there's always this indivisible touch of the artist or of the author in the book that you can't really get in a lot of other media. And so it's kind of like this really wonderful way to subconsciously engage with a part of your mind that wants to find patterns and wants to contextualize things within a space outside of your own head.
Thanks, Trung. And Jenny, I forgot to ask you, because Turtle in Paradise, you first wrote it as a prose novel, and then you've done original graphic novels like the Baby Mouse and the Squish series. What was it like adapting your own prose novel into the graphic novel format?
Sure. I mean, it was very different. I have to be honest and say Savannah did all the heavy lifting. She did. I mean, usually with Matt and I, we divide up the responsibilities. I do the writing and I lay out the whole graphic novel, and then he does all of the art, and we have a colorist also, usually Lark Pian for the Sunny series. But in this case, I didn't want to step on her toes too much because I'm such a huge fan of Bloom. I just think she's amazing, and I felt so fortunate to be able to work with her. And I think one of the things is when you're working with an incredibly talented artist, it's important to get out of the way a little bit. So I really try to let her find the moments that propelled the action forward, and piped in more on just helping with transitions and helping with all of the references, the historical references, stuff like that. But I mean, she took it farther than I ever thought. Like, just even all her clothing references, amazing, just amazing. So yeah, I mean, she deserves most of the credit.
Wow, thank you so much.
True.
I'm like blushing.
She did so much work. It's mind-blowing. It's truly mind-blowing.
Yeah, I've always wondered, when an artist and a writer collaborate, how much, is it an equal type of thing? Of course, Jenny, you did the original novel, so you did a lot of writing, to begin with. And then, so Savannah, you were just able to take that as you were reading. Did things pop up to you as you were reading did you read the novel first? And
Absolutely. I've read the novel like 3 times. Yeah, I've read it a lot, and adapting it was great. I think the chapters in itself, they really lend well to comics and the sort of pacing that I really wanted, just because they're kind of vignettes in themselves, the chapters, and then it kind of all comes together towards the end. But I had a great time, and it's my first time doing like an adaptation and writing a script from a novel. And yeah, there wasn't any like significant challenges. I had a really good time doing it. And I think it's because when I was a kid and I would read novels, after I would read a novel, I would draw like character sheets for all the characters. And like, I kind of have been doing this in my head, like without even knowing, for a really long time, for when I was younger. And so I think that just have the opportunity to just like go for it and just like adapt a novel, it was really great, and I would definitely do it again. I had a great time.
Okay, great. Thank you so much
No
for
worries.
everybody.
So this was wonderful. Thank you all for participating. The Q&As were great. I think all your comments were wonderful. It's and the camaraderie is really nice to see as well. We're really excited about the Random House graphics, and we thank all our attendees. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll say goodbye for now. And it will be on YouTube if you know someone that would like to see it and missed it. Thank you.